I'd like to welcome everyone to the second in our Distinguished Lecture series for the year, and the beginning of a month-long series of events in the program on the global environment. Tonight's lecture by Dr. Robert Repetto will not only be our second Distinguished Lecture, but it will also be the keynote to a conference. Is Development Sustainable? A conference in honor of the vision and the contributions of Professor Ted Stack, the founder and outgoing chair of the Environmental Studies program at the University of Chicago. And that conference will be held tomorrow from 9:30 to 4:30 in Stewart 102, which is just exactly opposite of us in the other alcove of the building. I'd particularly like to thank the Gaylord and Dorothy Donnelly Foundation, the Norman Waite Harris Memorial Foundation Fund, the U.S. Department of Education, and the Center for International Studies for supporting the scholarly program of the Program on the Global Environment in 2007 and 2008. And at this point, I would very much like to ask Ted Stack to give a proper introduction to Professor Repetto and his talk tonight. Is development sustainable?
Thank you, Mark, and good to be here. I appreciate the support that has been given to this event, and also the work that Dean Clayson and David Aptendilian put in to make this possible, and to make tomorrow's conference possible, and the media blitz that they sent out, which obviously succeeded in reaching it. I also want to thank the Center for International Studies for allowing me to choose today's keynote speaker. And I knew from the start that I wanted an economist, and I wanted someone with a hard nose and a soft heart. And that narrowed down the field quite a bit. And I think, as you'll see in a minute, that I found my man. Robert Repetto is a professor in the School of Forestry and Environmental Studies at Yale University. He did his undergraduate work at Harvard College and his PhD in economics at Harvard University, and wedged in between, he did a master's degree at the London School of Economics. Since then, he's held many positions at Harvard University, at Harvard School of Public Health, and at the University of Colorado. And he's also worked for the Ford Foundation, the World Bank, and the World Resources Institute. And now for the last 8 years, he's been at Yale. And I won't recount his many achievements and accomplishments, but give him the time to confront the question that's brought us here today. I'll talk about, is development sustainable?
Dean, am I supposed to be mic'd up here or not? Where's Dean? No.
It should just be good.
Okay. All right. So, first of all, I want to say how much an honor it is to be invited to participate in this conference in honor of Ted Stack for his contributions here at the university in the environmental studies program. I'm also delighted because, as it turns out, we're retiring on exactly the same day. And if anybody thinks to give me a conference, I'll invite Ted to come and give the keynote. Okay. Is development sustainable? You know, what a question. Let me rephrase it for you. It took us all of human history to get to this point, for the world economy to grow to this scale, to the human population to get to this size. In the process, living standards have been improved for a lot of people, but at a ferocious environmental cost, right? And so, can you ask yourself the question? Can you imagine the world economy doubling in size in the next 25 years and then redoubling in size for the next 25 years, in the next 25 years, and on and on? We all have a tendency to extrapolate trends blithely into the future. But in my view, anybody who thinks that this is sustainable is seriously delusional. This graph comes from my dean's new book, which I plug, The Bridge at the End of the World. And it just looks over the last couple of hundred years what's happening. Everything is on an exponential, right? Population, the damming of rivers, water use, fertilizer consumption, number of motor vehicles, right? And if you look at the environmental consequences of this, the scorecard, what we've already done, right? Up a third to a half of the world's forests are already gone. A quarter of the world's croplands significantly degraded. 2/3 of the world's fisheries already overfished. Over half of fresh water already diverted. Ground aquifers depleted all over the world. Freshwater bodies and coastal water bodies seriously polluted. Biotic resources, the loss of critical habitat. We have these hotspots in megadiversity countries. One of them is India, where I spent the fall semester, where the habitat is all constrained, fragmented, encroached upon. All of these mammals, reptiles, fish, birds, threatened and endangered. Oceans, habitat destruction, right? Coral reefs, reefs in peril all over the world, large percentage of them destroyed. The continental shelf, my friend Elliot Noor says, we worry about clear cutting of forests. The benthos in the continental shelf is clear cut several times a year by trawlers, dredges going over the bottom. Dead zones, not only in the Gulf of Mexico, but all over the world. So, we've already done, to this point in human history, tremendous amount of damage, okay? And the question is, can one look forward and imagine that this can continue at a geometric rate? Does anybody seriously think that? One way, that this has been, well, there are people who think that, actually. And one reason is that we've kind of masked the damage. Ted and I were talking about GDP and gross domestic product. that are all pointing upwards, right? But we've cooked the books in economics. These important natural resource damages have never been recorded appropriately in economic accounts as depreciation or depreciation of capital. Right? So they're all off the books. Right? And so recorded income is greatly overstated, and the rate of growth of income is greatly overstated. I was telling Ted my experience in China, where I was asked to help them do this green accounting exercise and some of the methodological issues. We did this, and they carried it on, and they finally produced a report saying that if you took the environmental costs onto the books, it'd amount to 5 to 7% of GDP every year, which is more than half of the growth rate, so that their economic growth, which everybody says is so miraculous, is greatly overstated. And we've tried for years to get that fixed. Still remains to be done. The economic statisticians are still resisting making those reforms. So now let's talk about the serious problems. The military talks about force multipliers. The biggest force multiplier we have now is climate change. Right? The overarching threat of climate change intensifies and exacerbates all of these problems. It's already happening, as you know. Temperatures are up 1 degree Fahrenheit. Concentrations are up 35% over pre-industrial levels. We've seen sea level rise. We've seen increase in sea surface temperatures. We've seen more precipitation in extreme events. We've seen glacial retreat. We've seen Arctic thawing. We've seen shifts in biotic ranges of plant and animals, changes in growing seasons. All of this has happened already. And of course, we're already committed at this point, even if miraculously concentrations were stabilized overnight, to as much again, simply because of the lags in the system. Right? But there's no chance that that can happen, that concentrations can be stopped overnight or even any time soon. People are saying, well, maybe by 2050 we'll manage to stabilize concentrations, if we can all get together and cooperate. And this is intensifying all of these problems. The desertification of soils because of drought, forest loss, forest fires are becoming more frequent and extensive as those parts of the world dry out. Forest pests expanding their ranges and living longer and not dying off. All of these fragmented habitats of threatened species. Well, the habitats can shift with climate, but the species can't because they're isolated in these little enclaves. In the oceans, the acidification of oceans affecting the whole marine food chain. Coral bleaching. More intense cyclones. Glacial retreat. We were talking earlier today about the Himalayas, which feed all of the important rivers that flow down in the east, and through Pakistan and the Punjab and Rajasthan, the Indus, the Satluj, the Ganges, and on the other side, the Brahmaputra, the Mekong, the Irrawaddy. And over the next half century, as the glaciers melt away, it's going to affect the runoff, both in magnitude and in timing of all of these rivers. And in the breadbasket of the Indo-Gangetic Plain, dependent on irrigation, they're really endangered. They're really endangered. Okay, so I'm going to leave this. It just says what I've said about what's going on. So if you think about the drivers of this process, and we have to think about the drivers of this process if we hope to intervene in any way. Population growth. At a minimum, demographers are projecting another 2 billion people added to the world's population before it stabilizes. Hard to imagine another 500 million people in India somehow, given the resource stress that is already so intense there. How are another 500 million people going to fit into that country? It's unbelievable. The only bright spot there is the rate at which fertility rates are falling, which is really faster, broader, and more extensive than people had ever thought. So that large parts of the developing world are now have below replacement fertility. In places like Bangladesh, fertility rates approaching or falling below replacement level. And all of the experience says that when fertility rates fall below that level, they never rise again. So what that says is that population at some point is not only going to stabilize and probably at lower levels than demographers now project, because every time they make these projections, the level at which they predict that stabilization will occur falls. Was 10 billion, then 9 billion, now it's 8.5 billion, and it may well fall below that, and may indeed, world population may indeed at some point decline. I mean, if fertility rates stay below replacement level, population will decline. The world will be full of old guys like us, and not too many of you young people. Economic growth. When I was a graduate student, Harvard had a famous economic historian, as famous as economic historians get, named Alexander Gerschenkron, who pointed out that sort of latecomers to the process of industrialization grow faster, which has always been the case. The United States grew faster than Europe. The Japanese grew faster than we did. Now China and India are growing faster than Japan did. And that's because, of course, they can import all this technology, they can import capital, they have access to worldwide markets, so on. So what you're seeing is economic growth in large countries like India, China, Brazil, much faster than it was historically. And that economic growth is in many ways increasingly resource intensive. People are eating their way up the food chain. Right? So when Indians and Chinese, I mean, have more money, can afford a higher so-called quality diet, start eating chicken, they're moving up a trophic level, right? And the resource demands grow rapidly. So, and of course, as production shifts around the world, a lot of the U.S. is increasingly a service industry, and these rapidly growing economies have much larger manufacturing sectors, and they want steel, and we can already see some of the effects in the price trends in the last year. Commodity prices high, right? From mineral prices, they want iron ore, they want metals, right? They want soybeans, and so on. So the other aspect of the problem is that at this scale of economic activity, we're encountering problems that are no longer local or regional or even national or even transnational. They're global. The climate problem is a global problem, and it can't be solved if the Annex I OECD countries, no matter what they do or what we do, if the developing countries continue on a business as usual path, then concentrations cannot be stabilized. And conversely, if the Annex I countries continue on a business as usual path, then concentrations couldn't be stabilized, no matter what the developing countries did. So there's no solution other than a cooperative solution. And we don't have any institutions through which to design and negotiate any global cooperative framework. So it all depends on voluntary agreements that are voluntarily implemented among countries. Extremely difficult problem. Any of you who think you have a solution to it, step forward. We need you. So that's where we are. So I want to talk now about, okay, what do we do? There may be some cognitive dissonance here for many of you, but that's okay. It's probably a good thing, if I just said what you all think, there'd be very little value added. Somehow we have to tame the market economy. I mean, there's a pretty wide agreement on that. We have to tame the market economy. And in my view, the market capitalism is the worst system in terms of sustainability, except for all the others. If you look at the record of other economic systems, their performance is even worse for a whole set of reasons that we could talk about. Okay. But if we're going to tame this beast, it's important to understand it. You wouldn't want to go into the ring as a lion tamer if you didn't understand the behavior of lions. So here's some things I think are true about market capitalism. One, it's an engine of growth. It's also an engine of innovation. Okay. Companies don't increase shareholder value, make money, just by churning out more of the same. Okay. You do that, pretty soon competition reduces the profit margin, and your earnings per share don't increase, and they go down. You know, you can start off, okay, making cheeseburgers, fine, but pretty soon, you know, McDonald's, there's also Burger King, there's also Wendy's, there's more competition, and you don't make a lot. Your earnings per share don't go up, and they may even go down, unless you think of something else to do. Some brilliant idea like, I don't know, McChicken, yeah, double cheeseburgers, right? Or, you know, like Gillette, let's have 2 razor blades. How about 3? You know? 4. Right. But basically, companies make money through innovation, right? By introducing new products and new processes. And in that way, they get a higher margin, at least for a while, and they make more money. So capitalism is an engine not just of growth, it's an engine of innovation. The second important thing to understand is that capitalism is driven fundamentally by a strong, really overwhelming profit motive. That's what it's about. Making profits. I mean, you know, it's a simple tropism to put it in, you know, biological terms. I mean, companies are drawn to profit-making opportunities like bugs are drawn to a light. Right? They can't help themselves in a certain sense. You know, and the CEO may make nice about corporate social responsibility and all of that, but it basically will do what's necessary to try to increase profits. And the CEO has to do that, otherwise he's out. Right? And therein lies the problem, but therein also lies the solution. Because businesses, corporations, CEOs, they're fundamentally pragmatic about how they make profits. You know, they're neither ideological nor idealistic about how they make money, as long as they make it. So, you know, I mean, companies introduce and withdraw products all the time. They change business models whenever it seems advantageous to do it. Right? Think of GE. You know, when I was a kid, we knew them for refrigerators and electric ranges. Then they got into finance and leasing and plastics, and then they sold off some of those businesses and started making wind turbines and gas turbines, and now they're into health systems. Because why? Well, they see these are high growth areas. So now that, you know, sure, renewable energy is great. Why? Well, because they see that it's a growing market. They're very pragmatic about it. Right? And again, they have to be, because if they're not willing to change business models when it's advantageous to do it, some other company will come along and do it for them. So here's the point. Corporations, companies, business will work toward sustainability and will work to solve environmental problems if, and only if, it's more profitable to do so than to do the opposite. You know, as long as waste can be disposed of cheaply or freely, as long as natural resources are underpriced, as long as providing or preserving ecological services is not rewarded, then companies will pollute, they'll deplete, and they will destroy natural systems. That's it. When it's more profitable to reduce waste rate generation, to reduce resource use, to restore natural systems, corporations will do that. I don't care. You know, it's like Lyndon Johnson, when he was starting out, he was applying for a job in Texas, in West Texas somewhere, teaching high school. And the school board asked him, do you preach evolution or creationism? And he looked at the school board trying to size them up and couldn't really see in their eyes which way they were leaning. So he said, well, I can teach it either way. And, you know, corporations are pretty much the same way. They'll teach it either way. So, you know, if it's more profitable for corporations to act sustainably or in a way that promotes sustainability, they'll do it, and they'll use their formidable powers of organization, of innovation and enterprise to do so. So, in a sense, I mean, the problem is trivially simple. Right? I put it this way. Imagine yourself on a summer night having dinner with friends al fresco on the patio, okay? And the bugs buzzing around the lantern bothering you. So what are you going to do? Are you going to sit there all evening swatting bugs? Or are you going to move the lantern? It's the same thing with corporations. You just have to move the lantern and make it more profitable for companies to act sustainably, and they will. So if we want to make progress, the first thing to do, let's kill all the lawyers. Why? Why do I say that? Well, the problem with lawyers is they want to pass laws and regulations and rules that try to get corporations to do things that they don't want to do, because they add costs and subtract from profits. So naturally, companies, you know, resist, they delay, they oppose. For all our trying, they have never accepted the strategy of just making it more profitable for companies to do the right thing. The other thing I want to say about market capitalism, it's important that we understand this, and that is the market economy is essentially an informational mechanism. It's one of the great social inventions in human history as a way of coordinating the behavior of individuals. It's extremely efficient, it's extremely powerful. It puts us right up there with ants and termites. It conveys environmental information to businessmen in a compact and clear way who know or care nothing about the environment. it provides the simplest of decision rules to everybody in an organization or out on the street. Right? Do what you can to reduce costs or increase profits. Take DuPont as an example. How many people do you think work for DuPont? How many?
6,000.
6,000? There are 60,000 DuPont has 60,000 employees. Okay. The CEO of DuPont was, making green utterances, saying the right thing, and let's assume that he actually meant it, and he was trying to green his company. How is he going to do that? To get every DuPont employee every day in all aspects of his work to incorporate the goal of, say, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, limiting the use of toxics, and at the same time moving towards high margin, high growth products and raising the rate of return on capital. And how does he get them to assign appropriate weights to all of these multiple objectives in each decision? I mean, does he install pop-ups on everybody's computer screen? Have everybody in for retraining sessions, give weekly pep talks? What does he do? We had an ex-CEO on our board when I was at the World Resources Institute, and he talked about this problem. What do you do? I mean, if these values are embedded in prices, right? So, for example, there's a carbon price for using carbon fuels or emitting CO2 emissions. And these other values are also incorporated in prices. All he has to say to them is do your job. Whether it's an engineer or a procurement officer or product designer or whatever, just do your job. Minimize, make your numbers. Minimize costs, increase the profits of your business unit. That's all he has to say. Doesn't matter whether 60,000 employees believe that the climate problem is real or whether there's any safe dose for toxics. Make your numbers. That's the power of the market economy as an informational device. Nothing compares to it. So what does that say? It says that our best chance is to embed these environmental values and environmental and ecological costs into market prices, and then let the system run. I'm not saying this is the only thing to do, but it's fundamental. It's fundamental. And we're making some progress in that direction. Those cap and trade systems in place. The first one, sulfur trading. Well, it's working. Surprise, surprise. It's working. There's a market. There's a market for sulfur emissions permits. There's a price. It's induced firms to cut back emissions faster and at less cost than anybody had anticipated. It's brought about fundamental changes in input use. Suddenly now we're using a lot more low sulfur coal than we used to use, for example. People doubt whether the price mechanism works. Well, look at gasoline taxes. People say, oh, they don't work. Well, they work over the long run. Compare the United States and Europe. Okay? And gas taxes have always been higher in Europe than in the US by a lot. Well, all right, Compare the cars that Europeans drive with the cars that we drive. Don't stop there. Look at public transportation systems in Europe and compare them with public transportation systems in this country. Look at the inner city in European cities and compare with the inner city in this country. Right? I mean, all of this are long-term adaptations to the high cost of driving. They work in the long run. So, how do we get there? I don't think we can get there without political reform. You know, the simplistic model that one learns in economics is that, okay, the economy works along the lines that I said, but the government sort of sets the framework to internalize the externalities, and business operates within those limitations. Okay? The unfortunate reality is that business strongly influences government actions, mostly to resist those limitations. And that's the most, to me, the most dangerous threat to sustainability, and that is that the large and growing influence of business on the policy apparatus. So, you know, political lobbying expenditure is huge. There's something like 25,000 lobbyists working in Washington and 45,000 in the state capitals. Lobbying expenditure is doubling every decade. Legislatures have become essentially high-priced brothels. You know, many legislators, they try to look good in public, but behind closed doors, they'll do just about anything for money. You know, and most politicians, while they're in office, have no interest in reforming the system because the system keeps the incumbents in office indefinitely. 95% or 98% of incumbents usually retain their jobs. So it's essential somehow to reduce corporate influence over political decisions. And that means reducing the influence of money in politics. Now, we were talking over lunch, you know, one way that, that Obama's campaign seems to have managed to do it is this using the internet to get, you know, small contributions from 2 million people. That, you know, 2 million people here, 2 million people there, it kind of adds up. That's one way. Another way would be publicly funded elections the way they have them in other countries, and shorter campaigning periods, right? I mean, our electoral campaigns go on forever, it seems, and getting longer and longer. Part of it involves reversing rules, empowering corporation participations. You know, this idea that corporations are persons with all of the legal rights of real people, right? They're fictional persons, but they have all of the real rights that we do. This idea that money is speech. My stepson, I don't know if you remember Granny D. Any of you remember Granny D? This 80-something, 90-year-old woman who walked across the country to publicize the need for campaign finance reform from this New Hampshire lady. My stepson drove the van. You know, somebody asked Granny D, well, don't you know that the Supreme Court has said that money is speech and it has protection under the First Amendment? And good Yankee fashion, she said, that's ridiculous. Money is money and speech is speech. which is true, as a matter of fact. Another thing that we need to do is that needs to be done is to strengthen shareholder governance over corporate lobbying. You know, turns out that most corporate decisions on corporate lobbying, what positions they take, how much money they spend, who they give it to, there's no board oversight. Even though it affects the shareholders. If you look at who are the shareholders? Well, a lot of the shareholders are employees. A lot of the shareholders of a company are neighbors. A lot of they live in the community, or they're consumers. So many of these, the lobbying that companies do is actually against the interests of shareholders in this broader context. So there needs to be, you know, one reform that's relatively easy to do is improve corporate governance over in the lobbying area. And then more accountability. You know, there are groups, advocacy groups, who are pushing shareholder resolutions asking for better disclosure. Companies have to disclose how much they spend and actually, to some extent, who they're lobbying, but they don't have to disclose what positions they're taking. So they can make nice in their glossy corporate sustainability report, but you know, they might actually be pushing quite different positions in private. So you know, to me, you know, we're not going to get there unless somehow these kind of political reforms can be made, because unless the political reforms are made, we're not going to be able to tame the market economy in the way that's essential. So that's how it looks from here. I hope I'm right. You know, because it's the only. I mean, I don't see any other way to go forward. So, thank you for listening. I appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Thank you, Bob. And before we open the floor for discussion, I want to remind you, I'm sure you already know, there will be a reception following our discussion, I guess, up one of these doors. So stick around, because Bob will be there to talk to you personally. But now, on behalf of the group, are there any questions for Dr. Repetto?
I like all of your proposals, or at least main outline, but of course the problem is even more complex. What do we do, for example, with the media and the reduction of diversity of the media? Because after all, re-educating the public is the only way you're going to get even stockholders wanting to do the right thing. The second thing, what do we do about the massive increase in income inequality? Because right now there is a great deal of political power at the top of the income distribution. And my father was an academic too. He paid 50% income taxes. We pay a lot less. And of course, we're at the low end of the income distribution in the top 10%.
Yeah. Well, let's think about the media first of all. Two trends are going on. I mean, one, as you say, the media giants are becoming more and more concentrated, but at the same time, you know, the diversity is actually increased on the internet, unbelievably so. You know, I mean, God knows what you can't find on the internet. You know, just plug in a search and all this stuff comes up. So in that sense, that access to various points of view have multiplied enormously, enormously. You know, and I mean, probably half the people in this room have a blog of some kind, and they can express their views on to the world in general. Right? Anybody who cares to listen or plug in. So that's one. One of the things that I think is really warranted. These media corporations have been grandfathered into bandwidth. You get it for nothing, you know. I mean, entrants have to buy it at auction, and it's expensive. It seems to me that as a quid pro quo, they should be required to provide free TV time to electoral candidates, because that's where most of the money goes, actually, for TV time. So, inequality. Well, you know, there's various aspects of this. I mean, the thing that gets most attention is the enormous amounts of money that relatively few people are making. And you know, some of these are CEOs, senior executives in big companies, and that's an issue of corporate governance. Then there are people in the financial world who essentially are making a lot of money by manipulating other people's money. And it's sort of a heads I win, tails you lose proposition. You know, if I bet right, I get 20% of the gains. If I bet wrong, well, sorry about that. I don't have to take 20% of the losses because it's your money. The only comfort I take in that, well, first of all, why anybody would, you know, put their money with these guys is beyond me, but a lot of people apparently do. The only comfort I take in that is that income inequality has obviously gone down substantially because there are like $1 trillion worth of losses, and most of these losses have been absorbed by people who are in these financial positions. So, but you know, the broader problem of income inequality is actively debated. You know, some of it obviously has to do with the globalization phenomenon, right? Demographic growth has all been in the developing countries. A lot of that is leaking over borders, but whether it comes over the borders in the form of imported goods or in terms of migrant workers, it puts downward pressure on wages of semi-skilled and unskilled workers. So that's in the broader picture, that's going on. Secondly, technological change has certainly been skill biased. Right? So whether it's in industries that are competing with imports, or industries that are exporting, or industries that are really non-traded industries, you see the same wage differentials broadening between unskilled and skilled workers. And that is largely due to the technological change, increasing the demand for high-skilled, tech-savvy workers. So, you know, what can be done about that? Well, obviously, you don't want to arrest technological change. At least I don't think you do. But clearly, there could be a lot done at the fiscal level, both on taxes and expenditure, to make the after-tax, after-budget inequality less.
Do you see the subprime mortgage and that crisis providing any handles to deal with any of these issues?
Yes and no. I mean, I think that, you know, Sarbanes-Oxley got passed after Enron, right? And there's going to be some legislation passed increasing the regulation of some of these non-bank financial institutions, and part of it is going to increase their capital requirements and in effect force them to have more skin in the game, you know, have more of their money at risk. I think that's likely to happen. Lee.
So I asked this question as somebody who's deeply sympathetic to your basic point that the price mechanism is an extremely useful lever, one that we have to look at. But in the spirit of my own University of Chicago experience, I guess I just want to press you on that a little bit and say, aren't there cases where it's in fact extremely difficult to construct a price? Indeed, I know you've written about the clean development mechanism where we go through all kinds of extremely difficult machinations to come up with a price for avoided carbon emissions. And it really, in fact, might be, therefore, much more efficient, would it not, in some cases, to actually regulate in sort of the old-fashioned way. You know, one could argue that one of the best, most effective environmental regulations in this country was simply outlawing lead, you know, addition to gasoline. Now, there was no price mechanism there, and yet most people would agree that was an extremely effective environmental regulation. So I'm just curious to what degree we have to balance making, you know, environmental conservation part of the profit motive with these other constraints on economic actors.
Right. Well, yes. I mean, it's clear. Some instances we just want to ban it, like DDT. It's like, let's ban it. Now, in this country, people, you know, in malaria-ridden places will argue, well, it's the best thing we have to deal with malaria-bearing mosquitoes. But that's certainly not the case here. Ban it. I agree with that. Lead actually is a different story because you remember there was this trading program, the lead phase down, which allowed the phase out of lead and gasoline to proceed much more smoothly and more quickly and more economically than it otherwise would have done.
Right.
Avoided deforestation in developing countries is certainly not, I mean, the difficulty is not so much in constructing a price, it's in constructing a market. And there's lots of problems in constructing a market for avoided deforestation. But having said that, it's not an area where regulation is going to be a superior solution. I mean, I've worked in Southeast Asia and I've worked on deforestation, and there's no country there that could pass a regulation that would stand a snowball's chance in hell of being enforced.
Steve?
Yeah, this is related to the last question. You spoke of a little externalities.
Yeah.
And implied that it would be a good thing to incorporate the costs of externalities somehow.
Right.
But to do that, don't you need to build in a discount rate? Now, the whole first part of what you said implied a small discount rate, a lot of concern for the future. But a corporate executive who's going to retire after 5 years has a discount rate that is much higher than was implied by your description of the future. How do we, if we're really in this room concerned with having a low discount rate, governing the way we do things, how do we produce a social change to make that become acceptable in a corporate world?
Well, you know, your corporate executive discount rate depends on how much stock and stock options he owns in the company.
Yeah.
If he owns stock in the company, the value of that stock will depend on anticipated future earnings.
Yeah.
So to say that, okay, he's out the door and he doesn't care anymore, well, that's, you know, that's not necessarily true, right? Right? So You know, yeah.
If he doesn't have to sow it, if he's not allowed to sow it right away, then he cares about the long distance.
I had this, you know, I mean, there is this question. I mean, it's not just corporate executives. I mean, study after study shows that individuals have a tremendously high discount rate. That's why they don't, you know, buy Energy Star washing machines. Politicians have even shorter discount rates, right? I mean, higher discount rates, shorter horizons.
Yeah.
So it's not, but
Makes sure.
the if in making these decisions, they don't have to be guided by the same discount rates you observe in the market. They're two different things.
Yeah. Yeah. I would just like to know sort of where you see the role of the worlds, or even the third worlds working for in this. Because what I kind of hear is that capitalist development is not sustainable, essentially, unless we make these political changes, which are causing sort of stockholders, so to speak, not to make the profit that they could. And what we need to do is make things so they're actually, in fact, green things, sort of summarize, attractive to stockholders or to create profit for stockholders. But what I think is probably the case, and maybe you could speak to this, is that the majority of the world, especially outside of sort of first world countries, are in fact not even at all able to buy into this system where they can reap any of the profits of market capitalism or corporate capitalism, et cetera. And what I see them doing, actually, and I think that this is the growing environmental issue, is that they're doing the very things that cause the deforestation of the rainforest, the small-scale slash and burn agriculture, all these things that sort of burn up the muscle of the earth while sort of stockholders compile adipose in profit. So I guess to sort of summarize that, what is the role of the third world sort of on the whole thing?
Well, you know, first of all, I would say that we tend to lump into the third world parts of the world that are very, very different. Right? I mean, our definition of the third world includes in one lump, one basket, Saudi Arabia, Chad, China, right? I mean, very, very different kinds of countries. And you know, if you look at the population of the third world, a lot of it is in countries, and even more of the economic activity is in countries that are well along the path towards market capitalism. And the same kind of issues arise there, building coal plants all over China and India. Water pollution, air pollution. Same kind of issues arise there. Perverse subsidies, which is something I've written a lot about. I mean, subsidies to agricultural chemicals, subsidies to irrigation water. All of these things send exactly the wrong kinds of price signals, not only to big companies, but to individual farmers. Right? We were talking about this earlier, that agriculture is much more chemical intensive, much more mechanized, much more water intensive than it would be if these resources were priced more reasonably. I challenge my students, go to any desert in the world you can think of, and you will find rice growing. This is true, you know. Why? Because in those deserts you usually find some irrigation systems, and the people with access to the irrigation system are growing water-intensive crops. Why? Because they get the water almost for free, and the profits per unit of land, not per unit of water, but per unit of land, a lot higher growing rice or even sugarcane in the middle of deserts. So, you know, a lot of the same considerations pertain in developing countries.
We have a question.
Yeah, along similar lines from your last comment, I was hoping that you could talk about how you see development factoring or development considerations in the world food crisis right now. I mean, I think, you know, we've all woken up to news on the media about how there's crises everywhere and people are rioting because they don't have access to food, whether it's just basic rice or whether it's wanting to maintain their access to, you know, upper level food chains because they've recently gained access to it, like in China. And hopefully you could touch on where you fall on how agriculture should develop, whether the green, you know, similar tactics have been used during the Green Revolution should be continued. Obviously, your last comment suggests that inputs are not priced sufficiently, but how do you respond to an argument about the timeliness of development and the fact that inputs, high agricultural, industrial inputs have resulted in a reduction in hunger worldwide?
Oh, I mean, I think no doubt, you know, I mean, the downsides, the Green Revolution has, the technological set of changes associated with the Green Revolution were extremely important over the last 30 years in allowing world food supply to grow in pace with population and world food demands. But as a matter of fact, we've almost run out the string. I mean, on that, even the under controlled conditions on experimental plots, yield levels have leveled off, and in fact, in farmers' fields, yields are actually declining, in part because of resource degradation. And at the same time, if you sort of do the arithmetic, it's likely that the demand for, say, food grains, for example, will expand threefold over the next 50 years. Now, how is the world going to produce 3 times as much food grains over the next 50 years in a declining resource base? Not going to be easy. One of the things that's inevitably going to happen, and it's already happening, is if you look at the available land, unfortunately, the available land is not where the people are. A lot of the available land is in South America, underutilized or unused cropland. In Argentina, in southern Brazil, in Uruguay, and Paraguay. And what you see is production expanding rapidly, and the corollary to that is you see world trade in agricultural products expanding rapidly. So essentially, you know, China is importing food grains, among other commodities, and exporting manufacturers. I don't see that changing. I think we need another green revolution and a greener revolution if there's going to be any hope of producing that meeting that increasing demand for food.
Ron?
Thank you for your comments. I find myself agreeing with nearly everything you said, which is rare.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, it's just uncomfortable. So I'm thinking of the implications of what you said, particularly for those graphs that you had at the beginning, the startling graphs, those exponential graphs, and the implications for your original answer. If we were to internalize all externalized cost of production vis-a-vis the environment, do these other types of reforms that you're suggesting, I can't expect you to put a number on it, but you know, what a can you reflect upon how that might impact the sustainability of our development then?
Yeah, would that do the job? You know, that's a very good question. Would that be enough? I don't know. I don't know. As I mentioned, you know, my dean's new book, The Bridge at the End of the World, he says, no, definitely that will not be enough. We need a change in values. Right? We need to realize that our satisfaction and well-being can be found elsewhere than in, you know, material comforts and so on. He may be right, I don't know, but then you ask him, well, okay, fine, how do you bring that about?
Well, I'm a little curious as to how the economic change, the internalizing all the externalities, could happen politically without first having a value shift. Because it's not just, in my eyes, like everyone wanting things to be green versus like big industry who's stopping that from happening. Like, for example, with the gas tax that both candidates have proposed, there's a lot of people who think, oh yeah, we need lower gas prices in the summer. So I guess for me, it feels like there needs to be a value shift before there can be that economic shift.
Yeah, well, I see your point. But you know, in this country, people, I mean, have come to regard taxes as, you know, are phobic about taxes. If you ask them, well, are you for environmental improvements in any detail? Let's say yes. Are you willing to pay for them? Yes. Would you support a gas tax? No. Okay. But actually, people are paying for environmental regulation. Raises costs. It raises prices. People pay the higher prices. They don't complain, and they're for environmental regulation. In fact, I think they should be more stringent. Right? I think, you know, other countries in Europe, for example, are much more accepting of taxes. I think we need to have more of a national discussion on. Well, first of all, let me say this. You can price all of these things into the market, not necessarily by taxes. Cap and trade is an alternative, you know, and it's a little less transparent, so people accept it more. No? But we need a discussion along the lines of, okay, we have to have revenues for the government. You know, if we're going to have a Social Security system, if we're going to have Medicare, if we're going to have these other things that we, you know, a federal aviation authority, et cetera, we need to have revenues for the government. How are we going to raise those revenues? Now, we raise those revenues by taxing payrolls. That's a tax on work, on employment. We raise raised them through income taxes. That's also a tax mainly on work, but also on investment, on savings, and so on. Should we continue to raise revenues through taxes on the things we actually want more of? Or should we raise revenues through taxes on the things we want less of? You know, I think we ought to have that discussion, and I wish some politician had the guts to lead it.
And thank you all for